my prostate sucks.
Well,
it's beginning to give problems, and urologist, which has a depictable medical specialty, some sort of bad karma or something.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we are now public, gentlemen, so just so you know. And
we'll stop talking about karma, taxi driver, bus drivers, and related topics. Okay?
Right. Exactly. No more taxi drivers.
Okay,
No taxi drivers karma,
Right.
Good morning, everyone. We are live. It's 9:10 in the morning in the East Coast of the United States. And do you know where your children are? And so here is, and Good Buddy Time says, think of the devil. He appears. Yes, indeed. Here we are. And we have Jordi with us from Madrid, Spain, right? You're in Madrid, right, Jordi?
Here it's late lunchtime.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I am having my daily cup of red wine.
Yep. They say
the concept of being generous with myself.
Yep.
Yes.
There must be the sun must be over the yardarm. And therefore it's okay to drink in Madrid. Might be a little early for me.
Yeah, I'm on the coffee with a half and half, so it's like
yeah. Well, you should get half and half calf coffee. That's what Debbie and I have been drinking for about 30 years probably. And it's half calf is good. You can drink more of it and do less damage.
That's someone made a cup of Senka, and which is decaf, but it I was like, what is this?
Yeah, well, that's not so good, but we get Folgers full-bodied half calf, and it works quite well. It comes in these big red tubs.
Yeah, that's how I'd get the Folgers French roast.
Yeah, it's just like Folgers French roast, except it's half calf. So anyway, good morning, everyone. I suppose some of you may have come to talk about Jungian psychology or ask any questions. We're watching the chat on the YouTube channel, and so if you have questions or comments, please raise them, and we'll see if we can address them. But in the short term, I have picked out something we should start to talk about, because Tim Holmes and I were looking at it at this passage in this book, and I'm looking at Liberating the Heart by Lawrence Yaffe, and I'm in the process of scanning this book since it's out of print, and you can find a ragtag copy of it on Amazon used books, I believe. But I'm scanning it and putting the scan onto our okay, Good Buddy Time is Neil from previous weeks, so he changed his name. So anyway, this is a remarkable book because Dr. Jaffe, who is the son of Agnelli Jaffe, who was the scribe in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So he was raised in this material, steeped in it. And naturally, because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, he became a Jungian analyst living in Berkeley. That was far, because I don't know how his mother or he ended up in the United States, but nonetheless they did. and he served as a Jungian analyst for many years. Unfortunately, he died, I think, in 2003, because I'd love to talk to him.
Right.
But yeah, he died at age 63, but he managed to get this book written before he did. And it's a very profound book. And so I'm going to read this paragraph that Tim and I were taken with in sort of layers starting from the bottom up. And this is in a chapter 4, called Christ as the Model for Individuation. And it's in a subtitle area called How Psychic Change Really Works. Okay, this is how things really change in your unconscious. And so the last sentence is, the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Okay, I'll read that sentence once again. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Do you want to comment on that one, Jordan, before I read the rest of the paragraph?
I do, and very simply and shortly, to me, it's also, people ask me all the time, how does divination work? And I find that simply the chords are struck in the imagination that resonate, and that rings the bell for the unconscious to well up contents from the creative wellspring, which is then that healing, that amplifying, and literally that leveling up of where you are in the present tense to have basically get more of a dose of yourself from the collective unconscious and a dose of the universe.
Yeah. And not only the collective unconscious, but your personal unconscious as well.
Yeah, both. And I think the tandem of the scales that comes in at the DNA level, microscopic, you, me, and then the macroscopic of the universe, the collective. It's really, I think, a powerful mixture, and that's that healing or health property that I think Dr. Lawrence Jaffe is talking about there with the purpose of Jung's work with the psyche.
Right. And so the whole idea that Dr. Jung was talking about throughout his career, no matter what he was writing on, was that the unconscious, which we refer to as the psyche sometimes, the unconscious is quite real, but it is really unconscious. It's not something that you can put your finger on at any given moment. And so you have to be aware of intimations that come from the unconscious, which suggest to you the right or wrong thing to do for your life. And so we can give an example just here of the three of us that are here on this conference this morning. For reasons passing understanding, for unconscious reasons, we all are here. Jordi Gall is from Madrid, and he's an emergency room doctor, among other things. And is that a fair description of you, Jordi? Are you an emergency room doctor right now?
I was long time ago. I was in more the emergency room, internal medicine, with some services in the emergency room. Right. But then at some point I switched to public health.
Oh, okay. That's right.
And just name dropping and making myself interesting, I got a Fulbright scholarship, and I spent about 3 years at Yale University, Department of Epidemiology and Public Health.
Okay.
And since then, I've been working with government.
Right. Okay. So you're an epidemiologist.
By training, mostly, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is a bad name nowadays, you know.
Nice. Well, and Skip, I mean, as you're speaking that there, that's why the ocean or the sea, the unconscious being truly unconscious, that's why the ocean or the sea is such a great visual metaphor for
Yes.
the unconscious, because I mean, you get the orcas and the seals and the porpoise great whites and the pufferfish, etc. Those are contents, but the ocean itself is that unconscious, wonderful motion, alive piece.
Right. Now, we have an interesting comment from someone who calls themselves Magic Sufi, and it's in all caps. So this person is shouting this at us. I am the enemy of the collective. Well, good luck with that.
Well, actually, what does that mean? That sounds to me, I don't mean to be insulting at all, but that sounds vague.
Right.
It's the kind of me against the world, like Frank Lloyd Wright. Could they expand upon that comment a little bit?
Well, we'll see if that happens. But meanwhile,
That's actually kind of a beautifully nihilistic statement. Anyway.
Well, let's put it this way. The collective unconscious is going to be there, whether you, at a gross level, and for the United States, we mean really gross, at the gross level, whether you're an enemy of it or not. But the trick of having a good life is to gain access to that part of the unconscious, which will heal you at any given moment. And that healing, we don't know exactly where that may come from. It could come from your personal unconscious, but it could come from the collective as well. And
it's interesting. That comment reminds me actually of an old martial arts training technique, the meditation of try to catch fire. And, the reaching to grab, it's not there,
right.
But it's there. And so I'm the enemy of the collective. When you say, well, it's going to stay there, to me, it's kind of like trying to grab fire. It's a similar statement.
So the further comment is fiercely individuated against insanity. Well, that's terrific. And, I'm fiercely against insanity as well. And I guess I've written at least 2 books that have tried to play with improving things, and nothing happened. And so as a result of that, I focused more on what Dr. Jung was really trying to say to us. And now I don't, we have there's a pithy way of saying this in the Marines, I don't know, but anyway, I don't attack walls I can't climb or bust down. And so anyway.
Well, that comment, actually, the further comment of fiercely individuated against insanity, that in a positive or workable, actionable, like that sounds like a solid anti-hysterical bias. Right. Someone who's responsive rather than reactive, if that's their meaning.
Okay. Again, in all caps, we get, what sane man would not fight against the insane collective unconscious? Well, yeah, sure.
I don't know about the adjective with the unconscious. It doesn't need it. It's like truth and love. It doesn't need adjectives. The unconscious isn't sane or insane. I think it's unsane, basically.
Right. And, a lot of good things can come from the collective unconscious as well. That, for example, just the fact that we have civilization at all, civilization itself, is ultimately caused by the unconscious. I mean, the way the human species can get along with one another instead of the males all having clubs and protecting their herd of females, is by civilization. And so all you have to do is go to the great ape exhibit at any zoo and look at the way life was before there was civilization. What you'll find is there'll be an alpha male who's in charge, and there will be a lot of daikini females around him, grooming him and pulling the bugs off him. And the younger males are all in the trees around in the sides, wishing that they had access to a female. And so, and if they did catch a female, you know what they would do. But we've developed quite a ways since the days of the great apes. And all of that is through civilization, and civilization is facilitated by the collective unconscious. And so we all reap the benefit of it. You know, we can rail against the insane part of it, and there is some insanity in it. But on the other hand, we all drive on the correct side of the road for our country, and we don't think anything about it. But that's a collective unconscious thing where you know, an interstate highway will go through many jurisdictions, and we never see the process by which the routes are developed and the rules for how to build the road, and you know what equipment and what materials to use, what signage to use. All those things are done outside of our consciousness, but they all work. Mm-hmm. And so that too is the collective unconscious, and that's a good thing, because if somebody said, well, I'm going to be an individuated and drive on the opposite side of the road, well, you wouldn't last too long. is the reality. I mean, we have one exit to U.S.50 here in Annapolis that, unfortunately, because it's the way it's set up with the retail part of the community, where the retail is right along the highway, sometimes people turn the wrong way out of, let's say, a car dealership, and they go right down the ramp in the wrong direction, and that's caused many deaths in my community over time. And
yeah, if you drive on the wrong side of the road, if the other cars aren't going to take you out, your insurance bill over time is going to take you out as it increases and increases and increases.
Right. And in the case of this, I mean, they have these huge red signs, stop, the wrong way, all these signs. But, you know, some people, you know, are driving sort of unconsciously themselves, and instead of turning right, which you have to do out of these businesses, whatever they are, you turn left, and all of a sudden you're on the superhighway going in the wrong direction. So, let's, you know,
I really quickly, I do find the comment of the unconscious having a quality of insanity to be kind of interesting. And from my perspective, it's a place where reasons are unreasonable. They don't need words. I'm comfortable with the not knowing while daily getting things done. So the concept of insanity there as a quality feels to be a wonderfully subjective personal perspective, because I'm not really grokking how it's insane, and unless it's not empirical or unreasonable, which that's not really insane. So I'm curious as to and we don't have to go any further into it, but
yeah, well, we all live in the ocean of the collective unconscious,
right,
whether we like it or not. If we go to the grocery store, you know, we have certain unconscious things that we do that respect everybody else's rights. We line up at the cash register, for example. That's an unconscious act that we just do without questioning. We don't just go to we don't just walk out of the store with food and not pay for it. And we also don't just go to the front door of the store and start shouting at the manager, "Here, come here, take my money," or something like that. We all
right. And even if we use a grocery delivery service like Instacart or something, that's still a collective system that's playing the same grocery game.
Yeah.
You're just not going to the store.
Jordy, go ahead.
One technical precision. It's not the same unconscious that not particularly conscious at the moment.
Yeah, okay. So that's maybe we could say it's subconscious, right? And
when you are competent at something like driving a car or piloting a plane or complex, say, eye-hand coordination, etc.,
yeah,
you do that with some level of automatism, not paying attention, not being aware of.
right.
A different issue, and I think that's pertinent in this context, is things which are not conscious, because either it will be extremely painful to rest consciousness, or there are other barriers, or just are beyond our realm
right.
of access.
Right. And Dr. Jung did say that the unconscious is, I would make a distinction between the subconscious and the unconscious. The subconscious would be that of which we're not right this minute aware of. For example, the rule to get in line to pay for your food. But so that would be subconscious. But the true unconscious is really unconscious, and Dr. Jung repeated that a number of times in video, and so the question is, how do we hear the unconscious so that we do the right thing? And so, for example, now I've been doing this YouTube channel for almost 6 years, going on 6 years, and it's a call. I don't not do it, or if I think I won't do it, then something doesn't work in my life. And so anyway, let's go on here. So Crispy Cakes, and I'm 23 and have been in analysis for over a year. What started out as a cool thing to look into Jung's work become an extremely scary thing. I was somewhat burned by some truths I faced. Well, yes, we will be burned by our shadow and the things that are not necessarily so pretty down there. And Kathy Kerr says, good morning, Skip and Jordan. Go ahead.
Good morning,
Jordan.
Kathy. I was going to say too, the being burned, and that's kind of the seeds of the phoenix when that happens, because it's training you to understand, to be able to rise from the ashes.
Right. And gradually we do that. We get traumatized by various things over a long period of time, and that makes us rethink what it is that we're what it is we're doing. I mean, if I take my life and point out that when I was growing up, I was the son of a naval officer, and so everything was hunky-dory kind of, and we went, the things that would happen to me was I'd get taken to the officers club for dinner on a Sunday night and that sort of thing. So being a military officer looked pretty darn good, but then I joined the Marine Corps and became an officer. And okay, yes, I could go to the officers club, but there's some ugly things you have to do on the back end of that before you have that privilege. And that's not necessarily so obvious to people. So when you see somebody with an officer's uniform on in any service in any country, the reality is that that person has been through hell more likely than not, and they wear their resume on their chest, and they wear their pecking order on their shoulders. So,
right.
So that's very
and it's
clear.
interesting that with that people who've been through hell, you find that they're more anti-hysterical, they're calmer, and it's not you're Thor, you're a superhero, you're fierce, you're a warrior, you're always jumping around beating things. It actually turns around to be the reverse, where I think the old quote stands that it's much better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So that really, I've noticed people who've really been through it end up being calmer, because it takes a lot of intensity to get past anything you've been through.
Sure. Okay, so Crispy Cake says, I'm very happy where I am now, and many of the things I've learned have changed my life permanently. I don't think I will ever be the same. Well, that's clear. And that's why one does analysis, I think, and especially at your age, it's still, you're still fairly young at age 23, you're still fairly young for really putting all this together and grokking it. Okay, so
I admire that.
Yeah,
I admire that because it's like a rite of passage, which we don't have in our culture directly. Right. So that analysis is a wonderful substitute for the child becoming the parent of the adult.
Okay, so Jad Dabul says, Edinger and Eric Neumann, what's your thoughts on these two? Jordan, would you like to take that one? And I'll come back to it momentarily.
Thoughts of Edinger and Eric Neumann?
Yeah.
From an Eric Neumann perspective, my favorite work of his is The Place of Creation. And it's a book that a lot of people surprisingly haven't heard of, but it goes into the creative wellspring, and it's very readable. And I read him, I guess that was 1993, in tandem with my first read through the 22 volumes of the collected works. And from an Edinger point of view, I'd have to get a more specific question, because he has so much breadth of work that to respond, there's such a multifaceted perspective. So I don't want to be too political and evade that part of the question. But to me, the Eric Neumann part, in tandem with the unconscious, the book, The Place of Creation, is one of the most, I think, pivotal pieces from his opus that deals directly with the creative wellspring in a very natural way that's you can easily grok.
Well, I will. I'm happy I asked you first, Jordan, because even I haven't heard of that book. So I'm going to have to go back and get myself a stocking stuffer for Christmas.
Well, yeah. And, I laughed that back when I read that book, I kept talking about Eric Newman, and people are like, Jordan, it's not Gary Newman's brother, it's Neumann.
Yeah, right.
You can tell when you've read something and you haven't actually spoken it.
So. Right. So, Jordy, do you want to comment on Neumann and Edinger?
Well, I don't know Neumann that well.
Uh-huh.
I only went through, and not fully, the origins of consciousness.
Mm.
I don't know what's the title in English, because I have the English version and a reasonable Spanish translation done by a Peruvian.
Mm-hmm.
The origins and history of consciousness, I think.
Yeah, origin and history of consciousness, yeah.
And to my understanding, it's a rather, say, dense work.
Yep.
It's something it's not a light read. It's something that you have to work it. Right. Review the meaning, the imagery, the metaphors he's using.
Yeah, this is why I have these 1.6 millimeter Bic pens, and I'll just show you that these things keep disappearing in my wife's purse. So this week, as in response to
I have my collection of office supplies from my office, for the sake of a joke.
Right. Well, I normally buy these by the dozen, but I've taken to buying 3 dozen at a time.
3 dozen, yeah.
You take some stock of pens.
And the reason is because I read as a meditation, and Jung was asked one time what his spiritual practice was, and his response was underlining books, and that's what I've done naturally for many years. And so in order to emphasize, I'll draw 2 lines sometimes, which make a darker line here when I think something is really important. But by drawing lines under critical passages, it makes me sort of reflect on that passage right then. And if I draw 2 lines, then I'm really reflecting. And what Edinger is to me is he's the intermediary that really brought Jung's psychology to life for me. And that's how he perceived himself over his career. He was a medical doctor. He was a psychiatrist. He was a founder of the C.G. Jung Institute in New York City with sorry, her name is Edith something.
Wharton. It's
No. With, I'm sorry, Esther Harding. Esther Harding is the one. Okay, so Esther Harding and Edinger founded the C.G. Jung Institute in New York. Then Edinger moved on to California, where he worked heavily in Southern California. And he wrote 17 books. Every one of them is brilliant and extremely useful. And I urge you to take a look at them. Now, it just so happens that at the beginning of this, session, I was getting links to Edinger statements that that I have personally transcribed. Let's see. And so let's see if I can get this on to, it's telling me I have 215 characters. All right, so this is this first link that I'm giving you is an interview with Lawrence Jaffe, who's the author of the book that I'm currently talking about. And then there's this, which is Edinger's Portable Analytic Hour. Let's see, okay, well, I'm only going to be able to give you the links. Maybe not even that, let's see. Because these links are so long, I don't know why.
It's wild when that happens. And like it's,
Pardon?
It's wild when the links are that long. I mean,
yeah. All right. And then Edinger's Individuation, a myth for modern man, which was a lecture. These lectures are so powerful. And I urge you to listen to them raw, and then I transcribed them because I knew that they would be very important to me. And that's why I did it. And I constantly refer back to them. And the one thing that I didn't realize was as important as it is, he often, people ask him, how do you, how do you do this? They want a how to cookie cutter for it. And he answers simply reflect. And that's literally what Jaffe also says in this book. And so I probably ought to read the full paragraph that we began this session on. And so let me first read the last sentence once again. So this is how we began today's session when I read this sentence. The purpose of Jung's... Go ahead, Jordy.
Where are you sending the links? In the chat or in an email?
They are in the YouTube YouTube chat. I'll just send them to you later by email. Okay.
I'll seek for the YouTube chat then.
Pardon?
No, I am interested in the links, particularly from Edinger, the ones you mentioned.
Yeah, I will forward those to you right after.
You pronounce Edinger or Edinger?
Edinger.
Edinger. Okay.
Yeah. I think the G is soft, but anyway, those are important. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, the beginning of this session. So the beginning of this session, we read this sentence: the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. Okay, so it's basically the same thing that's done in religions. So now let me go back to the beginning of that particular paragraph, which is what caught both Tim's and my attention this week. Here's what he says: the religious attitude of reflection or careful consideration of the conflicts which life offers us promotes the work of the transcendent function. And so the transcendent function is the connection between the conscious and the unconscious. And then he goes on. Thus, Jung says that his psychology, that it only helps us to find the way to the religious experience that makes us whole. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us the healing power which resides in our unconscious. Okay, so Jordy and Jordan have seen my example of this many times, but I have to show it to you there for those of you who are new. An example was, I live very close to the U.S. Naval Academy, and at the Naval Academy, there is the Cathedral of the Navy, and it's actually a full-blown cathedral built in a cross. The whole thing is just as you would find in a cathedral in Europe, in principle and in design, and it has in it 2 Tiffany windows. And I find those windows quite beautiful and splendid. And so sometimes when I'm feeling low, depressed for some reason, and I had good reason to be depressed a couple of times in the last decade, I have gone over to the chapel, not when there were chaplains there, because I don't find their message very useful to me anymore. But I went into the temenos of this chapel, and I normally sit on the right arm of the chapel as you face the cross. And in that part of the chapel, your pew is facing the left side. And on that left side is where the two Tiffany windows are. Or I guess there's one in front too, but there's this one on the left side. And so I go in there and just meditate, just in a sort of attitude of prayer. And one day I went in there and I was very low. I was feeling bad. And I was sitting there in the dark because the chapel it was like 10:30 in the morning. The chapel did not have a service going on, and I was alone in this 2,000 seat building. And then suddenly this happened. And it's very rare to be able to catch a religious experience, but this is mine. Okay, so here you see very clearly the Tiffany windows that are quite of a different category than these ones down below. They're very refined. And above the Tiffany window came this very bright sunlight, and it came only on me in this particular moment. Now, this is a synchronicity, but what it did was it opened up my unconscious. It made me think of many cases where in movies, for example, a moment from God would be depicted as light on a person. And so you can see how dark it was in the chapel that day. There was only the light from the windows, and boom, here's the sunlight on me. Now, I looked up at it and it completely changed my demeanor. And I said, wow, nobody's going to believe this unless I take a picture of it. So I pulled out my cell phone and snapped this picture of it. And then I turned the cell phone around on myself just to show what it was on me. And here's the other picture, 5 seconds later. And as you can see, the sun is only on me, on my face. And behind me is another stained glass window, actually. And some people have said this one looks like a gargoyle, but actually that's the seal, the Great Seal of the U.S. Naval Academy there. And it's a beautiful stained glass window in its own right, but you can see how dark it was that day and how dark it was in the chapel. And yet there was light only on me. And so and you can see my demeanor is completely changed. This is 10 seconds later. And I went from being really down in the dumps to being almost euphoric because I caught that moment. And so that's what we're talking about here, which is sort of a religious reaction, religious experience reaction. Now, it's only my experience. It's not anybody else's. I can only use it as show and tell. But the point is, this is what they're talking about, which is a religious attitude of reflection or careful consideration of the conflicts of life which life offers us, promotes the work of transcendent function. Thus, Jung says of his psychology that it only helps us to find the way to the religious experience that makes us whole. And I can tell you for sure that made me more whole, that particular experience. And the purpose of Jung psychology is to make accessible to us the healing power which resides in our unconscious. So that's exactly what happened to me. I felt the healing power of this religious experience, and maybe it was only the way I would react to it, but nonetheless, it's undeniable. So, Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, what's interesting is hearing that experience again this time reminded me actually when I was in Chartres Cathedral in France, and my stepmother walked up and she goes, Genesis 1, verse 3-4 says, God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. She said, that's really great, and that's really scholarly, and you'll probably see that in Gothic architecture and scholasticism, She said, but a better way to say it is look up at those stained glass windows. That's the voice of God in light. And so that's that healing that you were receiving there too, is that the purpose of the stained glass was, it's not just all these pretty colors. It's literally a divine voice that's spoken in light. And in many cathedrals, that's also why the choir is up behind you in a balcony, so you can't see the people singing up by the altar, which is very Western kind of, Methodist, Presbyterian, etc. But when you can't see the choir, then you just hear the voice of God singing through the choir. So it's all these invisible pieces that are real, that are then presented there that way architecturally between stained glass and even the location of the choir. And so you were receiving, that voice in light.
Yeah, that moment. Okay, let's read on with some of these. Again, Magic Sufi says it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. I agree entirely with that. And so that means, what are you going to do about it? That's what I want to know.
Exactly.
And so good
Take
buddy.
the helm in your own life.
Neil says collective unconscious against individual consciousness mismatch maybe causes the split in personality and is unstable, precisely. And it's the part of the neurosis of our times. And so it's very important that you gain access to what is in your unconscious so that you can hear it.
Well, there's also that Oedipal neurosis of our time of not leaving the house, not leaving home, not going out on your own, and not having the rite of passage of the child becoming the parent of the adult. It's a lot of when is, it's like life doesn't owe you a living. And, it's, if there's a silver platter, you're going to have to polish it or it tarnishes. I mean, there's work that's associated with these things. And part of that sickness to me is the entitlement and the lack, not of maturity. I'm not going to take a condescending approach, but just simply the lack of being kicked out into the wild with the wolves and the bison and the snakes for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And if you come back alive, then you're a man or a woman, back in native cultures. Right. But it kind of called out the survival of the fittest. But at the same time, there was a place of complete reflection without the sickness of other people. You had your own things to look at in those rites.
Right. Okay. So Kathy says lining up is a collective agreement as well. Yeah, it's a subconscious agreement. We all queue up, and if somebody breaks the queue, then they're violating that collective agreement as such. And all right, so
I would make 2 examples visually there. One would be the flocking behavior of birds, that we experience that in crowds, but it's when you experience the flocking behavior of the bait ball with fish, where they're trying to make themselves look bigger, but then the bigger fish just go through and get a bigger mouthful. Right. I mean, so there's those kind of pieces there with the lining up, as she said.
Right. So Neil has given us, or not on LibriVox audio books, has given us a bunch of quotes. I will read them. I'm just going to read them through because he's referring back to other authors. And what I want to say is this is not a general discussion on philosophy, okay? And it's not a general discussion on the philosophy of the Western world. So, if we allow ourselves to diverge to all these other thinkers, we're not getting the essence of what Dr. Jung was talking about. And so, normally, if you want to know more about these authors, please do go to a university and take courses in philosophy, but here I'm teaching Jungian psychology mainly because the universities think they're better than Dr. Jung, and they're not. And so, so I
in that philosophical note too, it's, go to William James, go to William Blake, go to Schopenhauer, and go to Aristotle, and you're going to have similar
and so
ideas.
that's exactly what we got here. So I'm just going to read through it. I'm going to read through it very quickly. Q, question, what do you think of these quotes in light of discussion on Psyche, quotes of George Santayana from Realm of Truth? There was one ethical illusion in Aristotle, an illusion that warped the impartiality of his precepts, but elsewhere he says there is no impartiality and rendered him partisan and dogmatic. In spite of this, his intention to be absolutely courteous and fair, he assumed that human nature was single and immutable, and the soul qualitatively identical in all men.
And that's an allusion to the unmoved mover.
Well, we don't need to even talk about that. Okay, let me just get through it all here. Yet this vital deafness is not absolute. At each moment, there is a limit inwards below which the psyche is not sensitive to variations of her own substance, and there is a margin outwards toward the infinite beyond which what happens does not affect her specific life.
That's just a diagram of a circle that equals self, and it has an inner and an outer.
Yeah.
Basically, inner infinity and outward infinity.
Okay, and Neil says we are a collective. Humans are not lone cats. Yeah, and generally I agree with that. Okay, so I'm not going to comment on Santayana or Aristotle or anybody else. Those, you probably have to go to graduate school in philosophy or something. Go to John Vervaeke's In Search of Meaning, or he has 50 lectures here on YouTube on all this stuff, and so I'm not the purveyor of that.
I would say graduate school, or get your local 4-year-old or 5-year-old at one of your friend's house, and you'll get the truth. There'll be no filter, and you'll get them out of the mouths of babes. So you go, oh, why didn't I notice that?
Yeah, that's why I often say, geez, I wish I had written down the quotes of my children when they were under 5.
Yeah, right.
Because they are profound, and it's where it's if any parent ever stops long enough to write down all these statements that your under 5-year-old makes, you can sell it. That'll be a bestseller.
Well, my grandfather was a Methodist minister, and after a funeral, I was 3, and he said something, and it was to talk about death candidly and openly. And I said, "Oh, that's nice, but I'm not going to die." And he goes, "Oh, we all die." And I said, "No, not me. When I go, they're going to put me in a new boy so I can chew gum." And I'm like, well, wow, okay. There's a little reincarnation thing going on there, but it's all about gum. So you talk about context.
Well, let's put it this way. We're all going to experience a physical death, but if we're going to be immortal, we had better have our good works done during this life. Okay. It's not, there's no reward after death from the physical perspective or from the perspective of your consciousness. You can certainly be immortal. Jesus Christ is definitely immortal. The Buddha is definitely immortal. Arjuna and Krishna are definitely immortal. They're not, because their spirits carry on through the ages successfully. And, for the reason I started this process in the first place was so that I could convey some information to my grandchildren after death, because I have one granddaughter who's 2 years old. So, unless I live to be 100, I'm not going to be able to have much influence on her, but I would like to hear from me, from my own mouth, what it is that I think. And so I know that YouTube will keep these videos in perpetuity because they're earning money from them. And so that's one of my motivations for doing this channel. It's not the only motivation, obviously, but it is one of my motivations. And even though I have 15,000 followers and get lots of hits every week, YouTube pays me something like $50 a month for that. So it's not a money maker.
Right.
because just my YouTube, or my Zoom account costs me $150 a month. Okay. And so, it's not a money maker. It's a calling. And
the counterpoint, the gum statement, it was a nice 3-year-old statement, but my quip now is, life is fatal. None of us are going to get out alive. So, and then you can kind of move on from the fear of death, because it's about living, not about worrying about dying.
That's the beauty of Jungian psychology, I think, is to face the reality.
Right.
And this is where I get in a sort of an impasse with one of my daughters, because when she was 15, I was talking about the meaning of the story of Lazarus in the Bible, who one of Christ's miracles was that he brought Lazarus back to life. Well, based on my own experience of the loss of my brother and my parents, and anybody who's lost a parent knows this, that, when that physical body that they were in dies, they continue on just as before. Okay, they don't go away in any important sense from your own heart. And Jordan knows this very clearly from the loss of his own father this year, that nothing about your father changed in your heart from that corpse wasn't your father.
There was a deepening. And
right.
It's interesting about the corpse not being my father, my dad. I didn't actually see the body. He was cremated because we were going to wait 6 months till everyone could come with the whole COVID gig. We had to wait till the summer. But at my grandfather's funeral, I remember standing over my grandfather's open casket, not in the church, because that would have been, he would have felt that was absurd, but at the private viewing at the funeral home prior to. And I was noticeably perplexed. And my stepmom came up and put her hand on my shoulder. She said, "Well, what's going on? You look confused. You look perplexed." And I said, "Well, that's not him. He was so full of life. That's not him." And, he had been a best friend to me. And so I just, I leaned over and I kissed him on the forehead, but that wasn't him. So like you said, that corpse was minus the life force that I knew. And it was interesting to me. That's why I think at that point, I was just sitting there steeping and being confused and perplexed and allowing it. But there was that realization of how identifiable and how deeply known the life force is.
Well, that life force is evident right here in this conversation, which we are spreading out live right now.
Right.
But beyond that, that life force will, as long as the video of this day carries on, that life force will carry on. It's a great work in a sense. The life force of your grandfather appears here in this live stream video, whichever you're watching, right?
Yeah, and after the session today, when it's there and repeatably watchable, then it's a memory that's a blessing. I mean, people can come on it and they can be, their life force can be inspired or moved or stirred in some way by it.
Right. And I guess I probably said this a week or two ago, that at my father's death, we knew that he was going to die, and we were having sushi, which was a favorite meal of his. And the phone call came in from the hospital saying that he had died, and did we want to come and see his corpse? And I said, no, that won't be necessary. He's here with us now. And
there you go. Yeah.
That's the way it is. And so when Jesus went in to Mary and Martha with the corpse of Lazarus, his friend there, it's quite obvious that the miracle he worked was to point out to them that Lazarus was still alive with them.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that, and because of that story, Lazarus is still here with us today. And is immortal and memorable in many ways. So anyway, Neil says, it seems the ego fragments the collective. Well, the role, there is an organizing function in the psyche. That's how we get anything. That's how we get this book, is that we, from the psyche, we figure out how to make a book and how to print it on a page and so on. That's an organizing function. And if we just left all the information that Dr. Jaffe has put in this book, if we let it die with him, then it wouldn't be very useful to us. Mm-hmm. And so we create the logos so that more of us can learn these truths. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, that separates us from the collective, because we who are listening to this video right now are, we are experiencing something, but not everyone is experiencing it, and not everyone would agree with it if they did hear it. And so, yes, in that sense, it fragments the collective, but at the same time, we need a strong ego in order to live our lives today, because if we don't have a strong one today, we would just be overwhelmed. I mean, there's so much that comes out of the television set every day in terms of advertisements of pharmaceuticals, for example.
Right.
I mean, how do you keep up with that? I mean, the government in its infinite wisdom makes these guys read out all the negative things that could happen to you. If you take this medicine, you could die.
Right.
And nobody can possibly keep up with that, right? And so you don't even hear that, really. Go ahead.
Two things. Yeah, there's a comedian, Lazy Boy. He has a Lazy Boy TV. At one point, he's going through pharmaceutical stuff. He's like, it's like, he goes, I couldn't walk down the street and I think I'm sick. It's like, they have a cancer thing, and I'm like, wow, how do I catch that? And it's like he goes, there's a hot chick and a puppy and a frisbee in the park, and it's about venereal disease. Oh, how do I catch that? Except then he says, do you wake up tired in the morning? He goes, oh my God, write this down. I have this, but it makes everything into a disease. But back to the ego fracturing the collective, I think we need to be mindful of slang psychological terms. People want to kill the ego, lose the ego, cut it off, amputate it. And I think what that is they want to cut off a-holes. They want to cut off people who are egomaniacal or just selfish. Right. And that's not ego, that's egotistical. And what it is it's self-serving instead of self-centered, meaning you have a center. So to me, psychologically, the ego actually is the logos of the psyche. It's an energetic containment vessel. And by itself, it's nothing. You have to pour the heart of the matter into it. So I think it's the egotistical that fractures the collective, not the ego.
Right. And Dr. Jung was very specific. I mean, he wanted to talk to people in the second half of life, mainly because he wanted to talk to people who had developed a strong enough ego to handle what he was saying. And he constantly quotes, and I frequently quote, 1 John 4:1, which is consider the spirits whether they be of God or not. And what he means by that is, you can get a lot of cockamamie ideas, okay? Some of those ideas are evil, okay? And you have to have a strong enough ego to differentiate between good and evil. And so that's the significance of eating of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, which of the knowledge of good and evil, which is that it's our responsibility to decide what's right and what's wrong. And you have to have a strong enough ego for that, because if you don't have a strong enough ego, you're going to get just washed into something that's very questionable, like the January 6th attack. I mean, many of those people had no clue why they were doing what they were doing. They just were going along with the crowd. Go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, yeah, and resisting the urge to make conversation and discussion a tennis match or a tennis rally. When someone says something, you don't just hit it right back over the net. You reflect on it. You receive it. You reflect on it. And sometimes you just look back and you don't even respond. There's no words. There are no words. And then sometimes it's, I need to sleep on that. And but I think it's the bam, 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 rat tat tat Gatling gun of the social media news feed or whatever. Everyone's trying to go so fast, and you get churned up in like a class 5 rapids of disinformation. So you don't understand how much BS you've actually acknowledged, and then you tell someone else, and the grapevine changes it, and by the time it comes back to you, it's even more. It's just capital BS, not lowercase.
Yeah, and we've all had our surfeit of BS in our lifetime.
Yeah. Okay, and some things make too much sense to be worth a damn. I mean, they have squeezed all the meaning out, and it's completely, hypothetical and completely proven. Well, I find that, okay, that's fine, but you just killed it. You just killed the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So good morning, Art. Welcome nice to see you today. And
Hey, Art.
So Neil says, we are so far from the collective, we are jittery, afraid alone in the dark. We wouldn't need all the psychiatry or psychology if we lived in a harmonic world and lived instead of trying to explain each moment. Good point. Of course, I
Very good
mean
point.
the psychotic ego today, not the healthy ego, like you say. Right. And so, we have to decide for ourselves. In the end, we can have all the rules. Okay, there's Edinger talked about 3 ages of the dispensation of what it is that religion is about. Okay, and so the first age was the age of the law, and that was Moses coming down off the mount with the 10 Commandments, and that sort of thing. Now, the 10 Commandments since then have been sliced and diced by any number of egos
Right.
for the last 3,500 years. But nonetheless, that was the age of the law. Then along came Christ, who was talking about belief, and he was talking about something that people could not see and therefore did not believe, and he followed through with that through his very life. He knew he would, in my guess, he knew that he would be executed long before that was in the cards, according to his followers. If his apostles had known that basically he was going to commit suicide, then who would follow him, right? But he knew what the consequences would be. I mean, we portray Palm Sunday as this wonderful parade of praise of Christ, but what Christ was doing at Palm Sunday and in the following week was intentionally doing things that would anger both the Pharisees and the Roman authorities. And so he was fulfilling the prophecy. He obviously was very scholarly about the prophecies of Isaiah and many other prophets of the Old Testament. And he followed those prophecies verbatim. I mean, he lived that life. He modeled himself after what the prophecies said. So in a sense, they became self-fulfilling prophecies. And so, if I understand correctly, and I'm not a great biblical scholar, but if I understand correctly, somewhere in Isaiah, there was a prophecy that the Messiah would borrow a donkey for something. Okay, I don't know what the prophecy exactly was, but it was something about a donkey. And so Christ comes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and he says to his followers, go find a she donkey and bring it to me. And if the master objects, say, your Lord has need of it. Okay, and that's what the prophecy had said, that the Messiah would say that, okay, that I have need of it. And God knows what happened to that donkey after the parade into Jerusalem, but here he was telling his followers to commit theft based on the prophecy, and and then he goes up into the temple and starts turning over the money changers' tables. Well, if you mess with the bankers, as I well know, they're not going to be happy with you.
Right.
That's the lesson there, and boy, do we know that one now. And so, Christ knew what he was doing. He knew that he was doing things that the Roman authorities and the Pharisees of that day would say, these are capital offenses. We don't need this guy in this world. Let's get rid of him. Let's crucify him. And that's what they did. And so he knew what he was doing. And, good chance by then his apostles also knew what they were doing, to include Judas. He knew what he was doing. And
well, that's the thing. Judas is a story too about how betrayal works. The old quote of, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. Well, the thing is, your enemies by default cannot betray you. They already don't like you, So when you keep your enemies closer, what happens is those close to you who are going to betray, what happens is you see your enemy's waters parting, and that means incoming, because they're opening up to let in the betrayal come through. Yeah. So that's, to me, the true lesson of, keep your enemies closer is that, one, it's don't be so judgmental, but two, it's instant recon. You can know what's going on, but they're going to tell you, you have incoming that was close, but now is about to become an enemy. I mean, so
precisely.
Yeah, but your enemies already don't like you very much, so they can't betray you.
Yeah. And Neil says, of course, I mean the psychotic ego today, not the healthy ego, like you say. Well, how do you know the psychotic ego?
I think psychotic is too strong a word. There's more of a, I think, anxious, anxiety-ridden ego, but it's not. It's almost. It feels to be a superficial neuroses. Like it's just, you're sprayed by the BS of society, but it's not really truly habit. Yeah, you're just accustomed.
If I understand psychotic properly, it's a mental disease or defect, and it's handled by psychiatrists normally these days with pharmaceuticals.
And it's a high intensity psychic situation. Like neurosis is a smaller, less intense, just more repetitive. But psychoses, it's similar to, it's like psychopathy and sociopathy. I mean, there being psychotic or being sociopathic, where there are different levels of these. And I think psychotic is, we throw that word around and like, oh, that's psychotic. But a friend of mine always says, that's relatively insane. And it's always funny when he says it because it's relatively. It's like
Jordy has appeared again. So Jordy,
poof, here he comes back.
Just a precision. Words and medical words have different meanings in different contexts. In the strict professional sense, psychotic is a very serious mental derangement. And basically, simplifying things, there are two types of psychosis. The maniac or maniac depressive one, the major maniac depressive one, bipolar or unipolar, and a schizophrenia. I mean, someone psychotic is someone who socially and medically is unable to master himself and needs to be under somebody else's tutorage. All of us know people who are mentally deranged, in our opinion, and probably we are right, they are mentally deranged, but there are degrees of derangement. Recalling James Bond. Bond, James Bond.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
He's a slightly dead.
Mm-hmm.
He's what?
Slightly
I'm
that.
He killed someone, and he gave. I think it was. I was recalling the actor, a British actor, and he said he's a slightly dead. Well, you are not a slightly psychotic. Either you are fully psychotic, and
Right.
it's something you don't want around.
Right. In the case of James Bond, he had a license to kill,
Right, right.
such as anything.
So,
Well, it's like his psychological inflation was to 33 psi, so his psychosis was road ready.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know how many of you or any of the people who's watching had any dealing with a serious schizophrenic, or a major depressive or a major maniac.
no.
You don't want him around.
Yeah,
No,
that's for sure.
Only in a closed clinical setting. Never, and then except for one person in Denver who was always.
Yeah,
it was a homeless person, but that's common.
The statistics in the States, maybe 2%, 2 per thousand. In the rest of the world are below 1 per thousand, because Americans tend to overdiagnose everything.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And if we use, say, the British standards and the American standards, American double here and in neurosis and everything, because they are, say, more generous with
Yeah.
the language.
I think a lot.
The whole point, and these statistics I think are interesting, it's 1 per thousand, roughly, or slightly less than 1 per thousand, which in the third world or in not very developed countries, they end up being troublemakers in the police depots, in jails, etc., because they are not properly handled.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
They are, say, public order issues. Now, if we go to paranoids, serious paranoids, I mean, real troublemakers, that may be many more, about 3, 4, 5%.
Mhm.
And many of them appear acceptably normal,
Mhm.
except they are not. And normally the troublemakers
Right.
in medical settings are the one making issues and disturbing, say, waiting rooms of trauma or other specialties, but they have a serious mental issue on top and foremost of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Now,
and go ahead.
that's 4 or 5 many more than serious psychotics. And if we go to neurotics with perhaps a temporary depression, that can be at any point 1 out of every 5.
How many?
Like 20%, 1 out of every 5.
20% of the population.
Well,
Now,
I wonder about that, Jordy, because I think that the whole of the American population has become neurotic at this point politically, because we've been forced into this red and blue duality, and to the point where we have a national neurosis. What do you think of that?
yes, but say, looking historically, say you go to 1870 and you jump to the railroad going from, I don't know, Chicago to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
1 out of every 5 there was seriously bananas as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
As in the New York subway or in the Madrid subway for the same token.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well,
I think
and also, I think also too that America has such anxiety that comes from a disconnection from nature. The civilization causing uncivilized behavior. It's more actually people who always have their face in this thing.
Yeah.
And you notice people, basically it says, don't bother me. They'll just sit there with their phone. Sometimes their phone's not on, or their headphones. And I find that's fine. Everyone has their own. I'm not going to try to be all judgy, but at the same time, I find that it's a Linus blanket. Like last night, I took myself out for a birthday dinner. My phone stayed in my pocket on silent, and I did. I was at my table by myself, Well, I just had thoughts. I had thinking, just a sandbox of the mind sitting on my table, reflecting on the year. And I didn't need to open, oh, I need to have have I got an email? And none of that. And I think that news feed, we're all nipping on the news feed, creates anxiety. And
Sure it does.
if you make shame walk the plank, you start to go, well, I don't want anxiety. It was tied to shame's ankles. And so was despair. And now, go feed the sharks. They're all over the plank.
Well, we have a wonderful...
I agree, but to some extent. And at the end of the day, there is an issue of cognitive economics. There is
cognitive economics, right?
Cognitive costs of all of that. And then there are table manners. I mean, when I am having lunch or dinner with someone, for instance, my children, if they don't behave, I don't pay. I mean, and I make clear when I sit. I mean, use when I'm going to the bathroom or something to check your WhatsApp.
That's
but
funny.
there are things we are not acceptable, and I do enforce that politely most of the time. Now,
so Kathy, in a very civilized way, has wished you a happy birthday, Jordan. So anyway,
thank you,
ahead,
Kathy,
Jordan.
very much. Thank you, Kathy.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Now, concerning the disconnection from nature, there is a point which makes things worse, and we have had this conversation at some point in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But looking the other way around, being connected to nature is no guarantee of anything. If you go to the rural sites, the amount of crazy people, and I would say the density of real bastards, I mean, really bad people. I think it's surprisingly high. I mean,
when I say nature, I don't mean the fringes. I mean out by a tree where there's nobody, out in the middle of, basically it up in the mountains somewhere, not at the edge of town. That rural piece. You're right. That's a lot more. That's a lot worse. That's not nature. That ends up being.
Let's stop and point out that Dr. Jung did say that we literally have people in about 10,000 years worth of development walking around in society
at the same time. Yeah.
At the same time, you don't know how psychologically developed a stranger is until you get to know them at all. Right. And so you have to be wary. But let me. One thing is the problem of ignorance. Okay, because Jordan, what would you say the attitude of the U.S. Marine Corps would be vis-a-vis carrying weapons on a Marine Corps base?
I think the attitude is that it's not only frowned upon, it's probably illegal.
Well, it certainly is illegal in the sense, unless
they're an MP,
unless you're a registered, I'm talking about, let's say, people who are living on a Marine Corps base who have an actual living place, okay, whether it be a barracks or a home. If you had a home, you would certainly have to register your weapon, and you would not be allowed to carry it publicly. Okay.
And it's almost like leave your work at the office. Leave that gun in your drawer in the office, or holstered up at home.
This came up this weekend in connection with these murders up in Michigan, where the parents thought it was a good idea to give their son a sidearm, a pistol, at age 15. But, we don't even do that in the U.S. Marine Corps. I mean, we have 17, 18-year-olds, but if they use a weapon, it's checked out from the armory in the morning and it's returned to the armory at night. It is not hanging around loose so that you can use it as a weapon. You're not permitted to do that. And so, you know, and actually the tradition of armories goes back thousands of years. I mean, you've seen it in movies about the Middle Ages, where, you know, people would take their broadaxes and cutlasses out of the armory if they were going to be in a battle, but they didn't carry them around. And you know, the same is true aboard ship. You know, on American ships, nobody's carrying a weapon around unless they have a specific reason that's part of their duty that day, such as somebody who is perhaps the officer of the deck. And, you know, even, I don't think even U.S. Navy ships, the officer of the deck would have a firearm on his possession. He would, if, you know, he might have one accessible to him where he could go get it in a hurry, but we don't let 18-year-old to 25-year-old kids run around with pistols, you know, in the U.S. military, nor, you know, weapons used in battle such as AR-15s.
Well, and you know, too, in society, and people say, oh, but back in the Wild West, everyone had a gun. Well, nature will kill you, and they were tougher, and they weren't so reactionary. They didn't take everything personally, you know, and because it's like, oh, that's fine. I've been called worse, you know. I mean, so what, you know? But now with all that anxiety and people just reacting rather than responding, there's not that to reflect, as Edinger said. That people having a gun and solving the problem by pulling the trigger, I find that actually to be wimpy, because that's actually a form of avoidance in my book. Because instead of, oh, that hurt, and owning that, oh, that hurt, well, there's some courage in that, but then you can discuss it and you can talk about it, you can communicate that, or you can leave. I mean, it's up to you.
So my point about the neurosis is, okay, there's a neurosis that says, you know, that red state people are very fanatic about the Second Amendment. Okay, I have no objection to people having a weapon for home protection, you know, but I have a friend who says he has 50 weapons, and I say, how can you even use that many weapons, right? And you know, when people talk about, well, I need it for hunting, well, no, you don't. I mean, I mean, if you're really into venison, maybe, but on the other hand, you know, you don't need and you shouldn't have an AR-15 to go hunting for a deer.
No,
okay, where's the sport in that? And
30-06. I mean, then there you go. It's
and so you know, people who think they need a semi-automatic weapon for hunting are, you know, just being silly, or they're a terrible shot. Probably probably the deer are safe.
It's like a hip shot from 50 with a sprayed weapon, you know, all over the place. It's interesting too, though. Well, actually, keep going. I lost my point. That one just came and went like a cork.
Yeah. So my point is that, you know, we have people who are simply ignorant, and the parents of this 15-year-old child who gave their son a pistol for Christmas, you know, that's just not a good idea, because young people don't have the skills, the experience, the knowledge to make appropriate judgments about that. And so, yes, in the Marine Corps, we learn all these weapons and so on, but we learn them in a very organized, specific way. We draw them from the armory for a specific purpose, and when we're done, we return them to the armory. And even in the basic school, when I was training to be an infantry officer, we were issued rifles that we kept for the entire 5 months, but those rifles were required to be locked to our racks. In other words, literally locked to our beds at all times when we were not actually using them for training. And that was only to simplify the armory issue, which can be cumbersome.
Your armory is your rack,
Yeah, right. But you're an officer and a gentleman by act of Congress, right? So you're supposed to be responsible enough to follow that rule that you keep your rifle.
Well, and I like the point you brought up about the Second Amendment. I mean, the right to bear arms, keep a well-organized militia, all that. The thing is, that was in 1700, et cetera, 1800, et cetera. We've accomplished that. That now is called the National Guard. Right. I mean, so that in a sense is an aged amendment, but taking it out is problematic. Just for misinterpret and ignorant reasons, but also simply because it's problematic to remove something from the Constitution like that. But we already have the National Guard.
Yeah, and the troubling news this week was that Governor DeSantis is creating a state guard that is not under the Pentagon. And it's a state militia. And to me, that smacks of the brown shirts. And of course, we know what happened to the brown shirts ultimately.
Right. Well, that's also a Civil War seed.
Yeah.
Jordy had it.
Yeah. Well, the states, you have a significant tradition of rogue militias in your history. I was thinking ones who kick out the Mormons from Chicago and things like that.
Yeah.
Or even interstate minor wars or skirmishes or things like that. Now, I am curious from what from an enlightened Jungian may say with Americans' love affair, with all the denials, etc., with weapons and weapon possession, which is quite unique to the States.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Europe and it's a non-issue here. We want a competent, well-policed police.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, when there is someone shot out and someone is dead, all the officers, they have to drop their flags and give in the weapons until the thing is not clarified.
Right.
That's a standard procedure in all our Europe, and things work more than reasonably well. I mean,
right. Sure. And as I understand it, in Switzerland, where there's mandatory military service, everyone is issued a rifle with and issued ammunition for that rifle, but they're required to keep it under lock and key, except if the government says, we need you for some reason. And I don't know of any real violations of that rule. Right. I mean, we don't hear about mass murders in Switzerland.
I never lived in Switzerland, but I know Switzerland reasonably well. And they are very good at policing themselves.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Total micro-policing themselves. I mean, at some point, all railroads, bridges, tunnels, and so on, had demolition charges. And they were handled by sergeants in the militia, which is very classified matter. And no safety issues. I mean, things like that. But that's very peculiar to the culture and the arrangements. And they have, I gather, an extremely subtle and powerful internal intelligence service for those things. they are very good at micromanaging, but that's an exception.
Yeah.
So to speak. But what is the fetish of weapons? I don't know if the right pronunciation in English.
Well, I think that's a good way to put it. What is the fetish of weapons? And what was coming to mind to me. I mean, I have relatives who hunt as a significant portion of their food, and that's fine. That's what it's for. But I do find the fetish of the fixation on weapons is really symbolic of a culture living in fear. And that's anxiety and that's despair, but I feel it's actually not living in fear, because I think fear is awareness. It's living being afraid, because there's a thing where they put a gun in someone's hand and all of a sudden they feel power for the first time. Well, but that's not their own personal power. It's a power generated by an artificial thing, which is then temporary, and it's not deeply ingrained in oneself.
Yes,
as a thought. It's just a thought.
I buy that, but I think there is more richness in fetishes, like having 3, say, Porsche cars. What the fuck? What is the little setup of the mentality of the fellow, or say overconsumption of things?
Yeah.
I think in this moment of much higher supply that in Jung's time, people are richer.
Right.
Or more comfortable, if you wish.
Right.
Some deep ingrained, say, mental traits are there. Not talking about the sexual fetishes, but those as well.
Well, I think you bring up a great point there, because I think you've just basically established the distinction of the currency of money, things, versus the currency of value.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah, but look, say, without going too far, fashion, lingerie, seen from the woman point of view. I am not talking about silicone now, or we can talk about silicone say, supplements as well.
Right.
There is a whole business here. I say in conscious business, projections, fantasies. What the hell? Why not? Type of issues. That has been quite ignored by Jungians, and they have practical implications. And I would say, so to speak, business-wise, weapons at the same level as silicon.
Yeah. Well, let us say that I don't think these were issues for Dr. Jung in his lifetime per se. Okay. I don't, they're...
Dr. Jung's lifetime, say, lingerie, cabaret, and particularly in the German-speaking countries,
right?
I've been told was something quite, say, entertaining and fancy and devil.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Joel Grey very well and Cabaret.
Yeah, well, Joel Grey or Bertolt Brecht, if you want.
Yeah, Bertolt Brecht.
Yeah,
Bertolt was a leftist and some sort of realistic cabaret.
Well, I've been, you know, there's a beer, a very popular beer, actually, even in the U.S. called San Pauli Girl, and it's about it's literally about a district of Hamburg, West Germany, called the Reeperbahn, and also called San Pauli, and and it's the red light district of Hamburg.
Right.
Well, you have the Dresden Dolls in, say, this Brechtian Cabaret, which is a Boston group. But all the story, I think the technical term is burlesque.
Yeah, since like cabaret, right.
Yeah.
Well, that was active in Zurich during Jung's time.
Oh, sure.
And people started with a significant part of their money in this type of stimulation, if not entertainment.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Like all like all strange philias, necrophilia or coprophilia or that type of thing, which was possibly more an issue at Jung's time than today.
Right,
Not pedophilia, but the other type of, they were called deviant behaviors. I mean.
So Jordi, what is your point on this, though? Are you saying that Jung should have done something about these?
No. Yeah, no. Well, of course, Jung should have been done all of everything, but besides that, on the Jungian framework, these type of issues have been generally neglected by most of Jung followers. I am talking about fetishes. Fetishes being weapons, being, say, consumption, being, say, silicon processes, and what's the inner process or the mental short circuits which end up entertaining that thoughts, if not that behavior. I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I still want to know what is the nexus of your point, which is, you know, I acknowledge that these things are not covered by Jungian psychology, and I'm only trying to present Jungian psychology for what it's worth, so that people can make their own call. But
I think they are pertinent and they are relevant. And
okay, I mean, they're pertinent for society, I acknowledge, but I don't really see why. I mean, what you're suggesting is that Dr. Jung's oeuvre is somehow deficient because it did not cover these things.
No. I mean,
you said pertinent and relevant, and I actually, what really came to my mind is when you mentioned looking at the thoughts, the thinking of these people when they say get a silicon prosthesis, some kind of silicon, this or that. And it's interesting to me is then you're externalizing physically the persona. And there is some mental things going on there that are problematic.
Oh, sure.
The I'm not good enough and all that kind of stuff. And I feel there's a nexus there with the externalization of the persona that you're bringing up because you mentioned the thinking that goes into why people do those kinds of things. Yeah. The guns, the consumption, the silicon, the Botox. I mean, all that kind of stuff that it's like you have your body and you were born with it and you have to live with it your whole life. It's better to love it because that's all you got.
No, I mean, I am not criticizing you for.
No, I see your point though now.
No, I don't though. So Jordi, explain it to me again. Why are we talking about this topic?
Because you put on the table the weapon thing.
So you're putting the fetish, the weapons in the fetish category.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's fair enough that they are a fetish, and they're part of a national neurosis that involves ignorance, because this. I don't think this couple, and obviously the prosecutors don't think the couple consciously thought that their son was going to go murder people with this pistol that they bought for him. But they did have a fetish about owning weapons, right? And so that causes problems in society, and that can't be allowed. And this is why it got too far over in the fetish, and so that can't be allowed in civilization. Otherwise, we have serious problems. And Jordi, I'm afraid that, oh, you're okay, I guess. And so the issue on neurosis, I just want to wrap this up because my wife is beginning her session here at 11, is that neuroses are when two conflicting duties are fighting against one another, pulling one another apart, whether it's a little deal or a big deal, as it is in the United States in the political context, the red and the blue. As long as we're pulling each other apart, we're not working together, and it is neurotic. We are neurotic as a country now because of politicians pulling us apart and finding a duality in everything. So they, if they find a duality that they think they can use politically, they'll emphasize one side so that it helps their side. And
also, too, keeping people in conflict keeps them aroused in trauma. Not sexually aroused, but aroused in trauma. And honestly, for example, if you're an architect, if you're a doctor, if you're an attorney, you're living under deadline for decades in a row continuously. And that's trauma. And so if you don't understand, like, from your military background, from Vietnam, you are in trauma for extended periods of time. And to be able to stay healthy and function in that takes reserve, takes constitution, takes a lot of discipline, but it doesn't take any reactionary. And I think that people here don't have the discipline so much trained to be responsive instead of being reactionary. And so they stay traumatized.
Okay, so I just want to wrap this in a bundle here because we don't have time for more until next week. But the issue is that in a neurosis, when there are two duties that are pulling one way or the other, Dr. Jung's solution is that you never cure a neurosis. You have to put a corral around it, or somehow encapsulate it in some way, and then you put it over in the corner of your mind, and you say, oh, when something comes up, you say, oh yeah, this is about that, and I've now grown beyond that. I don't need that anymore. And we find we're very much of the same mind when we're at war with another country. But I guess I have to stop now because so apologies, Jordy. I hope I've made some let's continue to discuss it next week if you like.
Say a late joke. Congratulations for joining the Air Force.
Actually, Marines are allowed to have this. I had this when I was.
Come on, that's Air Force tradition.
Well, I couldn't be now because the mask wouldn't seal. So.
No. But you could be in the Navy. Okay.
Yeah, that's
in the
true.
American Navy, we now allow beards, but the Marines are allowed mustaches.
Salute, as you say, salute Chesty Puller, whatever he
is. Chesty Puller, the most decorated ever Marine.
Nice.
He never won the Medal of Honor, but he won the Navy Cross, which is the second highest medal 5 times. He won it 5 times, including in the Frozen Chosen, when he was criticized for retreating, and he said, well, no, I'm not retreating, I'm simply attacking in a different direction.
We're surrounded. Great. It's a target-rich environment.
Anyway, a lot of stories there. We'll move on. Thank you, gentlemen, for being